Hey everyone, I'm here and welcome back to another video. Today, we are going to be talking about 5 interesting facts about the creation of the Lord of the Rings book. So let's get into it. Fact number 1. Tolkien's publisher didn't think that there was a big enough audience for high fantasy novels. When J.R.R. Tolkien first began to write The Lord of the Rings, he had already written The Hobbit, and that book had been published in 1937. It was very well received by both critics and readers alike. But when Tolkien approached his publisher at George Allen and Unwin about publishing his new book, The Lord of the Rings, which was much longer and more complex than The Hobbit, he was told that there wasn't a big enough audience in England for a long fantasy novel. This is despite the fact that The Hobbit had sold over 100,000 copies in England alone. But ultimately, Tolkien's publisher came around to the idea and agreed to publish the book. And as we all know now, The Lord of the Rings went on to become a massive success, selling over 150 million copies worldwide. Interesting fact number 2. Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings during World War II. Between 1939 and 1945, the world was at war and Tolkien found himself in a strange situation. He was a professor of Anglo-Saxon at the University of Oxford, but he was also a reservist in the British Army and he was called up to serve. However, Tolkien was not sent overseas. Instead, he was kept in England and given a desk job in the War Office's translation department. There he worked on translating enemy documents from German and Italian. While this was not the most dangerous job in the military, it was still stressful and Tolkien was often overworked. But despite this, he managed to find time to write The Lord of the Rings. He would often write in the evenings or on weekends, and he would take his work home with him from the office. In fact, some of the chapters of The Lord of the Rings were actually written in rooms above pubs while Tolkien was working as a bartender to make extra money. In total, Tolkien wrote nearly 400,000 words of The Lord of the Rings while he was working in the military. Moving on to fact number 3, Tolkien originally planned for the main character of The Lord of the Rings to be a dwarf. We all know that the main character in The Lord of the Rings is Frodo Baggins, a hobbit. But did you know that Tolkien actually first envisioned the story with a different protagonist? In fact, he had originally planned for the main character to be a dwarf named Balin. Tolkien even wrote a few chapters of the book from Balin's point of view. However, he soon abandoned this idea as he felt that Balin was not a strong enough character. He also felt that the dwarves as a whole were not interesting enough for a story. And so, he decided to change the main character to a hobbit. Tolkien felt that hobbits were a lot more relatable and interesting than dwarves, and he thought that they would make for a much better protagonist. In fact, he based the hobbits on his own experiences growing up in England. He said that the hobbits were like the English villagers, and he thought that they would make for a nice contrast to the other races in Middle-earth. Ultimately, Tolkien's decision to change the main character to a hobbit was a good one. Frodo Baggins has become one of the most iconic characters in literature, and the hobbits as a whole have become a staple of fantasy fiction. Let's move on to fact number 4. Did you know that Tolkien created the Elvish language before he wrote The Lord of the Rings? That's right. One of the things that makes The Lord of the Rings such an immersive read is Tolkien's use of language. He created entirely new languages for the elves, dwarves, and other races of Middle-earth. But did you know that he didn't just make up the languages for fun? He actually created them as part of his research for the book. You see, Tolkien wanted to make sure that the languages of Middle-earth sounded authentic. He didn't want them to sound like they were just made up, or that they didn't fit the cultures of the races that he created. So he did what any good researcher would do. He studied other languages and cultures to get inspiration for his own creations. In particular, Tolkien was inspired by the languages of Finland and Sweden. He was also inspired by ancient languages like Latin and Greek. By taking inspiration from all of these different languages, Tolkien created languages that were truly unique and immersive. His Elvish language, Quenya, is perhaps the most beautiful of all of them. It's a highly inflected language with a complex grammar, but its sound is what makes it truly special. The language is full of flowing vowels and soft consonants, and it has a musicality to it that is hard to resist. And finally, fact number 5. The Lord of the Rings was originally published as one book. As many of you probably already know, The Lord of the Rings is now published as 3 separate books. The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King. But did you know that it was originally published as one single volume? That's right. When The Lord of the Rings was first published in 1954, it was published as one book. However, this didn't last for long. In 1966, the book was split up into 3 parts and published separately. This was done for a few reasons. First of all, it made the books more affordable for readers, since they could buy one book at a time instead of having to buy all 3 at once. Secondly, it made the books easier to advertise and market. Each book could be marketed individually instead of having to market all 3 together. And finally, it made the books easier to read. Each book is self-contained, so readers didn't have to worry about getting lost or confused if they were starting in the middle of the series. Overall, splitting up The Lord of the Rings was probably a good decision. It made the books more accessible for readers, but it's interesting to know that they were originally published as one complete story. So there you have it, 5 interesting facts about the creation of The Lord of the Rings. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Until next time.